Welcome everybody to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's evening on Tuesday, Chat with Two Rabbis. We are very fortunate to have our Rabbi Barry Silver, our progressive rabbi, along with our guest, Rabbi Zvi Kahn, with the Orthodox opinion. So we have the progressive and the Orthodox going on. And take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for organizing this discussion. And I want to thank Rabbi Kahn for being here and all of our attendees who are watching and hopefully participating in this discussion. The name Zvi means dear, and Zvi is very dear to us, and so we appreciate him being here. I usually turn it over to him first, and we had some intense discussions before the meeting today to decide what we might want to talk about. And so, believe it or not, it wasn't my idea. Rabbi Kahn suggested that we speak about the first 100 days of the Biden administration after we discuss the Sedra for the week. The Sedra for the week is called Emor, which means say or tell. So Rabbi Kahn, Emor, tell us, what do you think about the Sedra?
There's a lot to cover in this week's Torah portion, but I'm gonna kind of jump to about the middle of the Torah portion where the Torah lists the Jewish holidays and says a little bit about each one of the holidays. And I think it's really interesting to note and important to note that the first one of the holidays that is mentioned in this list is Shabbat. And the reason I think that's striking is because we do not generally think of Shabbat as a Jewish holiday. When we think of the Jewish holidays, we think of Passover, we think of Shavuot, which is coming in just a few weeks. We think of the holiday of Sukkot, the festival of the booths. We think of Hanukkah, of course, lighting the menorah, and the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. These are the holidays, and all of those holidays, except with the exception of Hanukkah, which was a much later event. But all of those other holidays are listed there. But the first holiday listed is Shabbat. And I really think that the Torah is emphasizing to us that we should think of Shabbat, not just as a holiday, but as number one, as numero uno, the first in the list of holidays, because Shabbat is celebratory. So Shabbat is something to celebrate. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Silver sent me just this past Friday, right before Shabbat, he sent me the video of your congregation's Shabbat. I did not, unfortunately, have a chance to watch it then, but I watched it, I think, a couple of days ago, and it was very festive. It's very celebratory. It's very festive. I noticed that Rabbi Silver was changing outfits. Sometimes he had his Earth Day outfit on, and sometimes he had his rabbinic outfit on, and I, wow, this is great. And that's one of the things we do to celebrate Shabbat. One of the things we do is we change clothing. We wear special clothing on Shabbat. We do all different kinds of things. We have meals and family meals, and it's just Shabbat is we should celebrate Shabbat just like we honor and celebrate all of the different Jewish holidays, and really treat it as specially as we do the others, which is hard because it comes every week. And that's what makes it difficult. That's what makes it a challenge. It's one thing to know that once a year, let's say you have your Passover Seder and your Passover holiday, but Shabbat's here every week. So sometimes it's hard for it to feel as special and as unique. But I really think the Torah is saying it's number one. It's you have to try and make Shabbat for your family and for yourself important and special and festive, something that everybody enjoys, sitting around the table and singing and talking, sharing sharing what happened during the week, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll start with that one, Rabbi.
All right, thank you. I also found it interesting that all the holidays are mentioned. And what I notice is that the holidays, as described in the Torah, which is striking, is that these holidays are very, very different, as described in the Torah, than the way we observe these holidays today. And to me, this bespeaks the evolution of Judaism from the time of the Torah through the centuries until the present time. And so, of course, that also bespeaks human-made institutions that have evolved and grown over the years. For instance, it does mention Shabbat, but when it mentions it in Amor, in chapter 23, it doesn't mention anything about the reason being to celebrate creation or to celebrate the Exodus. There's just none of that there. Passover is described as the Feast of Matzahs. It doesn't say anything about the Exodus. It doesn't say celebrate Passover because of the Exodus. It's just Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzahs. Rosh Hashanah mentions absolutely nothing about the beginning of the year, the head of the year, the new year. That's not what it is at all. It's just a day of remembrance. It's actually not even the first month. It's in the 7th month. Yom Kippur is most known for fasting. The Torah doesn't say anything about fasting. It uses a different term, hanitem et nafshotechem, which has nothing to do with your body or food. It says you shall afflict your soul. Over time, this was interpreted to mean that you should fast. But the words etymologically and as originally used had absolutely nothing to do with fasting. It says nothing about food. So hanitem is kind of like, should make your soul suffer. You should cause it to be afflicted. So it's very interesting to see how these holidays have grown, which leads me to believe that each of us today can use these holidays in ways that maybe our ancestors didn't even dream of, to have even more meaning for us in today's world. The problem is that if you start to deviate without any type of foundation, then the holidays could mean anything you want. You could even decide not to observe them at all. So there's a very grave danger in just saying, well, the Torah doesn't specify exactly what we do today, so I guess anything goes. That tends to be a common reaction of many liberal Jews who don't really want to spend the time necessary to observe these holidays correctly. So they just say, well, the Torah is not authoritative, so I'll just go out and have a meal on Rosh Hashanah, and on Yom Kippur, I'll just have a meal after the fast. So we have to be careful not to allow these holidays to degenerate into anything we want. But on the other hand, there's a balance of trying to make them meaningful today. I do appreciate Rabbi Kahn's forbearance on my very untraditional shirt that I wore on Shabbat celebrating Earth Day.
I thought it was great.
I have a taskmaster, an overseer, who is my director. And when she saw that, she was aghast that I would dare wear a tie-dye t-shirt on Shabbat. But now I can say, Sharon, this must be appropriate. An Orthodox rabbi is saying that he found it appropriate. So now I've got cover. Nobody can challenge me wearing a tie-dye t-shirt. In fact, I may do that every Shabbat now, because now that I have your, what do they call that, Rabbi? The hechsher? Your hechsher, your seal of approval?
No. Absolutely.
Now,
absolutely.
I think I might start a new trend now of wearing a tie-dye t-shirt. Well, at least, Sharon, I'll say this. I'll wear it every Earth Day. How's that? All right. So now, Rabbi Kahn, is there anything else you'd like to share about the passage?
Well, I would say, just to respond to the points that you made, it's absolutely true. It's 100% accurate what you mentioned. But of course, this is not the only place in the Torah where the holidays and Shabbat are talked about. They're talked about in numerous different places. And it's in those other places where you'll find many of the details. For example, blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, for example, Passover being connected to the Exodus from Egypt and the story of the Exodus, and eating the matzah and eating the bitter herbs. So all different kinds of things. Shabbat being connected to the 7 days of creation. All of those things are found in the Torah, but it's absolutely true that they're not mentioned here in this particular list, which is cause for, discussion and interesting discussion and conversation amongst the commentators about why that is. So it's definitely a very valid point and something to think about. The only
Rabbi
other
Kahn, I just want to say your response is very accurate also. That's a very rational response, that they don't have to cover every detail of every holiday every time it's mentioned. So your response also makes sense.
Thank you, sir. That's how that you liked my approval of your shirt. I appreciate your approval of of my point. I actually have upstairs, I wish I would run up and grab it. I have a great tie-dyed shirt that looks a lot like the one you wore. So had I had foresight, I would have worn that for tonight's discussion.
Rabbi Kahn, I suspect that if you were conducting a Shabbat service, you probably wouldn't wear that as your attire. Right?
Listen, Earth Day breaks all the rules. So we'll have to see
good.
what happens next year on Earth Day.
We're on the same wavelength there. Okay.
In any case, and I love the videos that were in the Shabbat. There was a David Attenborough piece, and there were beautiful songs and videos. I was like kind of blown away. It was great. But at this point, if we want to shift over to the Biden thing, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've actually been very excited to see all of the things that happen. 100 days doesn't seem like it's that long, but a lot of things have happened in this country for the positive, also some challenges and difficulties. But I see Sharon had her hand up. She might have a question.
Well, I just want to know what else is in the parsha besides because you did start in the middle. I just kind of want to know what else is in there that we should be aware of before we jump to the 100 days. I want to jump to the 100 days, but I want a little bit more Torah parsha.
Okay, well, let's bring out some of the not so pleasant aspects of the passage, because sometimes when I read some parts of the passage that are not so enlightened, and when my father, who was a classic Reform rabbi, read from the Torah, he would just skip over these because he was embarrassed by it and didn't want anyone to dwell on it, even know that this stuff was there. I tend to read some of these passages just so people can understand what the Torah consists of, warts and all, so we can form an opinion about, well, who wrote this, or where is this coming from? One of the passages in it, I'd be interested in getting Rabbi Kahn's take, is the blasphemer, the guy who blasphemes God. We don't know exactly what he said, but either he said God doesn't exist, God's not true, don't pay attention to his rules, maybe God's a little harsh. Who knows what he said, but something that wasn't consistent with the proper respect that they thought should be given to God. And then they kind of asked, well, what do we do with the guy? And God is pretty clear, he shall be stoned to death, and that's pretty much what happened. That's reason 12,008 that I don't think a divine being wrote this particular scripture that some people think is divinely created. Rabbi Kahn, I'll let you share your commentary about that particular passage and the penalties for blasphemy.
I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. And then I'll also, Sharon, I want to get back to your question and just talk about a little bit of more of the content. And I think that's appropriate to do. There's no doubt it's unavoidable. There's no escaping the fact that if a person reads through the entire, the 5 books of Moses, the entire Torah, they're going to find some very, very harsh and extreme penalties for things that nowadays with modern sensibilities and modern times, they run totally counter to each other. We even for murder nowadays, there's a tremendous movement not to have capital punishment. So over the course of the millennia, over the course of thousands of years, society's views have shifted, not necessarily in all countries and all places, but certainly in the Western world and in the United States. The whole idea of capital punishment for any kind of offense whatsoever, again, even murder, is something that is generally is frowned upon by many people. But the Torah is I think not concerned about that. I really don't believe that that God feels that we should just say, okay, let's look out there and see how whatever particular society we live in views things, and then that has to be the correct approach. The Torah challenges us to view things in different ways. Now, it is true, and I've made the point before, that Jewish courts haven't carried out capital punishment for 2,000 years, and even when they did have the ability and capacity to carry out capital punishment, it was an exceedingly rare thing to have happen. But there are cases, as Rabbi Silver absolutely accurately points out, where the Torah itself talks about cases of the penalty of capital punishment being carried out. I think in terms of the idea or the concepts behind it, the ideology behind it, for something like blasphemy and for something like a person cursing God or saying terrible things about God, whatever that might be, is that the Torah viewed the Jewish people's mission in this world as being completely tied up with not only believing in God and serving God, but spreading that idea, spreading monotheism and spreading the belief in God to a completely pagan and idolatrous world. And the Torah makes it clear that that was the mission. That's what made Abraham so special, because he said, I'm not going to follow in the footsteps of my own father and my own family and worship idols. I'm going to believe in monotheism, and I'm going to spread the teachings of one God around the world. And then that continued on through Isaac and Jacob, all the way to, of course, Moses leading the people out of Egypt and to Mount Sinai to receive the laws and the 10 Commandments and receive the laws from the God who I believe views it as central that the Jewish people accept God, believe in God, and try and spread that to the rest of the world. When a person stands up from this perspective, when a person stands up and says, you know, that not only do they not want to spread teachings about God, but they're going to curse God publicly after, you know, in that particular case, after being warned and having witnesses and et cetera, then there was a very harsh punishment. There was a capital, you know, it was viewed as a capital crime, and a harsh punishment was exacted. My point is not to say that anything I'm going to say is to make any person with modern sensibilities say, oh, well, that makes sense. I totally get that. I think we should do that. That's not my aspiration, but I am trying to say that we are often challenged by different teachings in the Torah to go back and say, well, why was that the viewpoint? Why was that carried out? Why was it viewed as so important? And why was that considered such a serious crime? It doesn't mean that we'll necessarily fit it in with our own contemporary sensitivities. But I do think it's important to try and understand those things.
Rabbi Kahn, in the Torah, it says that they brought this guy to Moses, and then they confined the person to figure out what to do. And then Moses actually approached God. And God spoke to Moses, saying, take the blasphemer out of the camp. Let all who heard him place their hands on his head. The entire community shall then stone him to death. Do you take that literally, that God actually told that to Moses? Or is that maybe Moses just thought he did, or maybe other people did? Or do you think that really happened the way the Torah describes it?
I do take that literally. I think there's more detail to the story that might not be present, you know, but yes, I do.
What could possibly justify that? I mean, how would you worship that kind of a God? It sounds pretty barbaric. You know, I mean, if you were there and saw that happen, do you think you would still believe that God did that? I mean, it's not like God is saying, you know, put him in time out for a while or something. I mean, that strikes most people as barbaric. And it does seem that our modern sensibilities are far ahead of anything that God came up with in those days. And if I was living back then, my days would have been numbered a long time ago. I would have been stoned for blasphemy years ago. So, and I don't think I'm that bad a guy, you know, so I guess my father would have too. So it just seems kind of harsh or difficult to believe that God actually told that to Moses.
Just to respond to the last point you make, you know, it's very hard. It's impossible to know how we would have acted had we been there, because we'd be putting ourselves in a completely different set of circumstances. We would have been raised differently. We would have had totally different experiences. And so how we would view things, how we would relate to things, how we might interpret things, I think is impossible to say. Obviously, we can't take the self we are now and just transport it back through a time machine to be there. If we actually lived then, I mean, you know, this is true in any period of history. You could go back, take a simple example. You could go back to let's say the 1930s, or the period of the World War in this country. And the way people were raised and thought was really different in many important ways. And the country changed so much between the 1940s and 50s. And nowadays, which is a little tiny period, a little tiny gap of time. So, you know, I just think it's what we're challenged to do, I believe, as Jewish people, is to say we live in a modern world that has its own values and its own ideas and its own concepts, and we are educated in that way. But then we have this document, this Torah, that our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents certainly esteemed, our ancestors passed all these things down onto us. And so how do we put those things together? How do we make sense of that? How do we have to challenge ourselves to try and understand things many times that are very hard to understand, or relate to things that really run counter to our modern sensibilities. And I advocate for not assuming that all of the values and ideas of modern life must be true. I mean, I definitely don't believe that. And I think that's really very provable if a person wants to go to the trouble to talk about and assess modern values and ideas. I think there's a lot of things that are unethical and illogical in modern society that we all just take for granted and accept. So I think it's important to challenge ourselves to be above that, to think about different ways of looking at things, some very hard.
Yeah, you know, I think that if we were living in that time and we would go along with this, then there would be something wrong with us. There's something seriously wrong with any person who would see that happen and think that's okay. You know, nowadays we would know that it wasn't. But I don't want to be too disputational, argumentative, but let me just ask you this, because I am curious, because it is interesting to me to see how people analyze things who think differently than I do. If God is telling Moses to stone a blasphemer, but in modern times we don't do that, why is it that you think that we know more than God? If God is pronouncing this as the proper punishment for someone who blasphemes God, and modern sensibilities say, no, that's kind of harsh, why do you as an Orthodox rabbi place our modern sensibilities above God's wisdom? Apparently God thought this was the right thing to do. So how do we know better than God?
I actually think I don't understand the question, because I think I made the opposite point. I did not intend to make the point that we should place modern sensibilities above God. I made the point, again, what I thought was the opposite point, that we should not take for granted that modern ideas, modern sensibilities, modern approaches, philosophies, ideologies are better.
No, I hear you. That's why I'm asking you. In Leviticus, it's telling us what God thinks should be done to blasphemers. They should be stoned to death. So why wouldn't you believe that if someone's committing blasphemy today, that person should be stoned to death, because that's what God ordered. That's what God believes. So why don't you, I take it you don't believe that a blasphemer should be stoned to death. Is that correct?
Well, let me say it a little differently. The entire list of things that the Torah talks about, any kind of capital punishment, was set aside when the second temple was destroyed, because the Sanhedrin could only carry out capital punishment when the temple was standing. And that's based on the connection of two verses at a certain specific spot in the Torah between talking about the functions of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish courts, and the temple. And those two things were very interrelated. So the reason there's nothing, I don't advocate for capital punishment to be carried out at all from a Jewish Torah perspective nowadays, because for that reason, because we're not able within Judaism, within Torah law, to carry out capital punishment, again, for about the last 2,000 years since the second temple was destroyed in 70.
Why not? Why not? God's telling you what we should do with blasphemers. Who cares about what the Sanhedrin thinks? That's just a bunch of people. God is telling us that the proper penalty for blasphemy, in his opinion, is execution by stoning. So why is it that you believe that shouldn't take place today if somebody's committing blasphemy? Why would you go against God?
My point is to try and say that God, in addition to saying these are things that capital punishment is appropriate for, also said capital punishment shouldn't be carried out unless the temple and Sanhedrin are both in existence, and they're not in existence.
Where is that? Do you know? Where is it that he says that all these rules, all these death penalties shouldn't happen unless there's a Sanhedrin in existence? Because when the Torah was written, there wasn't even a Sanhedrin. It didn't even exist then. So how would God be saying that if the Sanhedrin is not in existence, you can't do this? Because if that was true, then Moses couldn't have carried out the death penalty because Moses would have said, "Hey, God, there's no Sanhedrin here."
The word Sanhedrin, you're right, doesn't appear in the Torah, but the idea of a court system certainly is talked about in the Torah. And
there's no court here. There's no court here. Moses just asked God. God says, "Execute him," and people just pick up the stones, and he's done. He's out.
But it's clear that they had a court system, and it's clear that that court system, with if it would make no sense for Moses not to be the head of the court system. It's clear from several places in the Torah that Moses was what we would call like a Supreme Court justice, was the head of the court system. I'm happy to look up and find the verses for you. I don't remember them offhand.
That's all right. I don't want to beat this one to death because we've already had one death by stoning in the passage, so I don't want to overdo it. Let's talk about Biden. All right, and I do appreciate your putting up with my inquiries, because I do the same thing with my brothers. My brothers, we're all pretty different. We have some pretty weird, or I have some pretty weird brothers. I have friends that think weird things, and I'm always asking them questions like to explain why they think a certain way. And I have no issues people asking me. I'm happy to explain myself also, but I do appreciate your forbearance. I don't mean any disrespect, but I'm just kind of curious what the thought processes are that lead you to that conclusion. But let's talk about Biden. So tell me what you think about Biden's first 100 days.
Are you asking me, or you're opening it up?
No, go ahead. I want to hear your
just to start off with, I think really the big three for me, the big three are this tremendously proactive approach to fighting the coronavirus and doing what we can to save people's lives. It's such a breath of fresh air. It just is so liberating and such a fantastic feeling. And to see what he accomplished, he exceeded his goals. He exceeded, he talked about 100 million people being vaccinated, and we're now talking about close to 200 million people being vaccinated. And I just think it makes me proud to be an American. It makes me proud to be a human being, actually, to see the efforts to save lives. Let us do whatever we can to save lives. It seems so simple. It seems so obvious. But until Biden came in and took over, it wasn't simple and it wasn't obvious. So I'm really, to me, that's the biggest thing. The second thing is,
and how do you feel about the head of Pfizer being Jewish, and also Israel taking a lead on this? And I think the other day they had 0 deaths. There was a day that they had no deaths from COVID. How do you? I guess that makes you feel proud, also, right?
Absolutely. Israel made such a tremendous move by connecting with Pfizer and being willing to kind of be the experimental grounds and reporting and giving in the data. And now they're at a point, of being able to tell people you no longer have to wear masks outside, and we can open up society more. And as you mentioned, the most important thing is no deaths. And even if you're just bringing that lower and lower, it's hard to say we're going to have 0 deaths in any country from COVID for a while, but just bringing the amount lower and lower is incredible.
Well, you know why that is, Rabbi Kahn, because in Yiddish, respect is kavod, and life is 18. So kavod 18 can always defeat kavod 19. Respect for life that the Jews have will conquer kavod 19, right?
It looks that way. Thank God.
All right, what's number 2?
Well, I don't want to give all of my own, because then I'll take it away from other people to talk about. So I'm just going to rest on the way Biden came out in his administration, fought COVID, and make it priority number 1. Then I'm going to turn it over to everybody else.
Well, you said you had thought about this for a while, so I am curious just to have you go.
Circle back to me. If anybody wants one out, I'll tell you.
All right. I'll also just say this before we get to the other people. I just find it a breath of fresh air that we are discussing something with a free thinker, because many people in the Orthodox camp or the Reform camp, they toe a party line. Oh, I'm Orthodox. Okay, that means I have to believe this. Or, oh, I'm Reform. I got to believe these things. It's just very refreshing for me to hear someone who's actually an independent free thinker, who has rationally held views about everything and doesn't have to toe a party line. So it's a pleasure to converse with you. We had somewhat of the opposite experience last week, and this is definitely preferable. All right, anybody else want to share some thoughts about Biden? Go ahead, Emily. We got a bunch of flaming liberals here, so go ahead.
Oh, unmute yourself, Emily.
I am very happy that he's doing two things. Well, beside the COVID thing that that was primary, that he's focusing on the infrastructure. I mean, bridges are falling down, roads are falling apart, and nobody has done anything to it. It reminded me of being in the Ukraine years ago, and after the communists left, nobody came in to do anything, and the place was falling apart. I want our country to again look good, and be able to move forward. That was a number. Well, I don't know what number you want to call it, but then also climate change, to acknowledge that climate change is a real thing. Did you hear today that the axis of the earth has been tilted slightly by the melting glaciers? And not to deny that climate change is really happening, and we have to think about saving our planet.
Yeah, who else? Who wants to share some thoughts? Joel, you must have something to say about Biden.
I have a list of 20 things. Don't ask me. He's doing what he has to do because he knows what to do. And unfortunately, in the past, we had people that didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they didn't bother asking people that did know. They didn't even relate back to Bush, or for that matter, Obama, or anybody else like that who crossed that bridge before. So Biden's moving forward using the people that he knows will do the job done. He's got the experience. You know, when you hire people to a company many times, it takes them 6 months to find the bathroom. These people came in, they know exactly where to go. And there was no wait. The same way with his stimulus package, they took the bull by the horn and they told McConnell, Chabder and Bud, we're not going to look for your 60 votes. And they moved it forward by using the idea that it was something that had to be approved because of the emergency of the situation. And they were able to get it through by, I forgot what it's not cloture. It's not cloture. It's something. They have another name.
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation. And they used the reconciliation, which hardly has ever been used, but they used the reconciliation and they got it approved. McConnell was upset. Good for him. Same way with McCarthy. As far as immigration goes, he didn't fall down on immigration. He did the right thing with immigration. Immigration was busting at the seams. It was waiting to happen. It was evident that when they pulled the money back from the countries in Central and South America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, they pulled that money back under TRUMP, I think. They pulled it back under that person. He took it away from them, and it created a worse problem for them there. The people there were dying from getting killed from the gangs. They were getting kidnapped. There was corruption, and they wanted to get out. And they sent their kids forward, knowing that the kids would get across the border because we were compassionate, supposedly. But we weren't compassionate for the last 4 years. We are compassionate now. We have a compassionate president. He has empathy. And for that reason, the dam bust. And they weren't prepared for it. But I understand now, according to the reports coming in, they're moving forward quite quickly, getting these kids placed, getting done what they have to do, and getting them out of those cages. So that's going to work out, but that's the lowest thing on his list that he was of approvals, is the immigration. Now, gun control. Gun control has been a pistol as you go along. It's been a mess. Hopefully they can get something done with it. That falls under the Police and Crime Act, which they're putting forward now. There is an act by some of the representatives that have put forth one. It should get through because there's bipartisan support. Infrastructure, of course, is the $2 trillion. The Republicans came back with $680 billion. Where do they come to $680 billion to $2 trillion? We're far apart. In that $680 billion, they left a lot of things off, naturally, to get to that point. Now comes the negotiations. Hopefully they can move the negotiations ahead. I predict, but you can write this down, on the 27th, I predict it'll be about $1,500,000,000. I think that's where it's going to come in at. And some of the juice will be out of it, but you can't help it. But we'll get it passed.
I have a question for you.
I'm not
Joel,
done.
is there anything about Biden that you don't like, or that you think he's not doing well?
I think Biden's a nice man. He's not a bee buster, and I like to see him bust the bees a little bit more.
Like, what should he, like, specifically, what should he be doing? Like, who should he be harder?
I would take Mechana by the and I would get him out of there on the basis out of his hair, so that he can move it forward. The man is blocking at every move with no comment, no sense. He hasn't got a reason. He just doesn't want it.
But how would he do that? What do you think he should do to get him out of the way? What would he do?
Barry, you're asking me a question. If I knew, I'd be president.
Well, it's good to make a suggestion, but if it's not possible
The
to
suggestion,
do it,
you asked me who, and I gave you the name of one person. I can go down a whole list. If you
I wasn't asking who, I was more asking what. Like, is there something that he's not doing correctly? I gather you think he should be tougher, but I'm not sure, like, what would he do?
It's 100 days. He's got a lot on his plate. I think he's doing what he has to do with what's on his plate. I think some of the things that probably should be coming up also, there's just not room on the plate. So you're going to have to move some of these things off the plate first and move it down. We got the next 100 days to look down. 100 days is a short time in a government of 4 years. And we should applaud the guy. The Republicans that got the stimulus checks, that are getting the vaccine, should kiss his tuchus. And they're not doing that. Shame on them.
I got another question for you, Joel. Was there anything that Obama did that you didn't like?
Yeah, there was a lot of things Obama did. He didn't handle the Syrian thing with the line. He drew the line and didn't handle that well. You know, I don't want to get into it, Barry. I'm an old guy. I can't think about these things anymore. I'm ready to go back and get my doctorate now.
I only ask because I just like to check people's credibility to see, like, are they just completely, like,
no, I'm not tunnel vision on anything.
All right.
If the guy is doing the right thing, I don't care who he is.
Okay.
Black, white, pink, or green, I don't care.
Well, I happen to agree pretty much with your assessment of Biden, but I just wanted to know. Is there anyone else who wants to share some thoughts? I have a feeling that Valerie is not too enchanted with everything that Biden is doing, and I would like to hear Valerie's point of view and anybody else, and then I'll weigh in with some of my own comments. Valerie, you want to share your thoughts about Biden's 100 days?
Well, look, there's no question that there was a lot of things that had to be reversed. There's no question that there were issues. There's no question the man is trying to move forward as fast as he can. I have some issues. For example, the World Health Organization. There was some serious problems with that. Just to turn around and dump money onto that, it's like, once again, throwing good money after bad. There are changes that had to be made. The Iran deal, okay? The Iran deal was not a good deal. You were in a position to renegotiate that deal. I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in the process, but there were many things that needed to be done. As far as climate control, this World Health
Organization. On Iran, we don't have a deal with Iran, right?
Well, no, but they're talking about getting back into it, and I think
you don't object to discussing that.
I think Israel needs to play a much stronger role in advising the United States on how to handle that particular deal, because they are the primary objective of Iran's ire, if you will, as well as many of the other Arabic countries who now realize the extreme danger that even they are in with the Iran situation. So I agree with you on that. Yep. I think we are approaching it from a Western mentality as opposed to a Middle Eastern mentality. Yeah. And I have a problem with that. Getting back, with the climate control and what have you, we were funding. And two of the worst culprits with regard to climate issues are India and China. They have been cast, they have been looked over, they have been given the slide, they've been able to get away with a lot of stuff. We were the ones that were really going to be held with our feet to the fire. Okay, if you're going to get back into a situation like that, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't at some point, because it is a very valid institution and has to be addressed. But we were in a very, very good position to hold their feet to the fire and make India and China, which were the worst culprits of climate, they just ignored everything. They were given a pass, and they were given a pass till 10, 15 years from now. And we were the ones that immediately had to adhere to all of these rules and regulations. We were in a position to renegotiate that. And before we get back into these deals, we have to look at it much more objectively and make it work for everybody. And we should not be carrying the load. We also, at this point with the UN, we were funding many, many of the issues of the UN. Many of the other participatory countries were not carrying their fair share. Okay, and while the UN, I believe in the UN, I believe in the cause, I think it's a very valid institution, but here again, over the past 30 years, a lot of things have gone sideways, and we were in a position right now to renegotiate and pull things back into line, because we were in a very powerful position. We were the ones that were funding the UN, and I'm afraid we're going to go back to doing that to the extent that other countries are going to say, well, Biden's a nice guy, so let's go back to not paying our fair share because the dumb Americans will throw money at it, because that's what we do. And we're starting to have the reputation again of doing that. That is what I think needs to really be addressed, because while there's a lot of things that have to be done immediately, if you're looking 2, 3, 4 years down the road, we're going to get right back into these situations that we are really being pressed for. The citizens of this country with our tax dollars are paying for all of the other countries. In many instances, Germany gave hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia for that stupid pipeline, instead of paying their dues to the UN, instead of paying their dues to the World Health Organization, instead of paying their dues to the climate controls issues. Okay, a lot of money was diverted. We picked up the price of all of that. We've been covering the costs of all that. I think those are issues that really, really need to be addressed. Okay, having said that, I'll be quiet.
Thanks. I want to ask you something, and you made a lot of great points. But when you say that we've been like so good on climate change, and these other countries, China and India, we need, they've been acting poorly, and we should, hold them to account. It seems to me that the United States, I agree with you about China and India. The two of them are atrocious when it comes to the planet, especially with all these coal fire power plants in China. That's horrible. But the United States was like the only country other than like one other country to opt out of the Paris Accord. The United States under Trump, we've been a climate denier for 4 years. The United States was saying burn baby burn and was mocking all these efforts. So who are we to come in and say, hey, you guys, you're not doing the right thing? It seems like, I agree with you, they're not doing the right thing, but we were like the worst climate offender on the planet just by not working with anyone, denying it, not recognizing it.
Well, you see, you're going backwards. I'm not agreeing with what we were doing. I'm not saying that was the right thing.
But who are we? And who are we to say
what I'm
how
saying
great
is that we've been, look, even China manipulates its dollars. It has taken advantage of us. I just had to buy a new computer. Well, I don't care what brand of the computer it is. It's being manufactured in China. They put a stamp of Hewlett-Packard, and then they produce 10,000 computers, and then they'll put a stamp of another name on it, and they'll produce those computers. I mean, we have literally given away our ability to make a living. We've given away all of our manufacturing. We've given away everything, and it's not just this past administration. It's over the past 30 or 40 years. Our general administrations have undermined this country. We've given away everything that made us a great power. Okay, and I think we have to start to pull that back. Do we have to do it in a rational way? Yes, but we can't cut slack. I mean, China and India have been given slack, have been allowed to get away with this for years and years and years, and we're the ones that are being held with our feet to the fire, and we have to do something right away. Well, wait a second, we are not the worst offenders. Yes, we have to recognize climate control. Yes, we have to be participatory, but we should not cover all the expenses. if you're going to be participatory, everybody's got to share in the expenses as well as the responsibilities.
Yeah, well, you know what China's doing, really, you can't really blame China, because they were communist and we were capitalist, and we said to them, hey, you guys ought to learn our system. You should become capitalists. And they did. They do it better than we do. You can't really fault them for manufacturing all this stuff and having us buy stuff from them. That's the American way. It's like,
I'm not faulting them, I'm faulting us. I just said we spent the last 30 and 40 years giving our economy away, giving our manufacturing away. We did that. Okay, now my generation and your children's generation and our grandchildren's generation are going to pay the price for that, because our representatives, our quote unquote leaders, have been so short-sighted.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we're all going to pay a heavy price if we don't call on Sharon, because she's operating the whole Zoom thing and she's got something to say. So go ahead, Sharon.
I nominate Valerie to go to Washington and be our next senator or House of Representatives. We just got a new representative, and I think Valerie Jett should be in our corner, pushing them to do the right thing in Washington.
Oh, goodness vague.
Well,
I'm not that Michiganer.
I got to know her position on the agri-surgery.
Great points. I just wanted to share a couple of things. One, today I was watching a news broadcast, and there was a surplus of COVID vaccinations in the United States. And the Republican Senate and Congress, GOPs, are doing commercials to tell people to get vaccinated, a promotion, a campaign, and it's going to be on TV. I don't know whether it'll be in Florida or not, but in the states where it's really lopsided and they're not getting vaccinated, they're going to be doing a commercial campaign to say, please, please go out and get your vaccine. Scientists, all kinds of great people are going to be doing that. Another thing that was on the news today was about people were in line, that they're letting them come into Texas and have temporary residency in Texas, some of the illegal aliens and their entire families. There's some wording they have to follow exactly. There's some people that can't do that, but they were in line waiting to be heard with their paperwork, and they were going to be allowed to stay in Texas until their case is heard, and they can, temporary dwelling in the United States, which I think is fabulous. So I think that we're on the right track, especially with vaccinations. I don't know why a lot of people are choosing, especially some of the younger people are choosing not to get the vaccination. And I think it's stupid, really. And I know the United States is going to be giving some of our surplus vaccinations to India, which I think is fabulous. And I hope they do it very, very soon. Yeah. Go ahead, Emily. Unmute yourself.
Much as I love to argue against you, Rabbi Barry, I'm going to support you this time. I think we have to start thinking about a global economy rather than being so egocentric. You are absolutely right. China has done a better job at developing capitalism based on their communist background. I see nothing wrong with socialism. In China, they take much better care of their elderly. They provide preschool for all kids. They, of course, have very stringent rules about where the preschools have to be. It's if you were born in Siberia or whatever, in northern Manchuria, you have to. That's where your kid has to go to school. There are all kinds of rules. However, they do some things very well, and we can learn from each other. It's not going to help our population that is not any longer a manufacturing population. We are not going to be developing factories where our people work, because that's not what we raise our kids to do. Do you raise your kids to go work on the assembly line like I Love Lucy? No. Seriously, but people in other parts of the world look at those jobs as a valuable thing for them to do. So we have to think about the global economy and how the world itself is improving rather than being rivals.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Joel, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I think Valerie did a great job, but, and there's always a but, internationally, I got to remind you all that the past 4 years, our State Department was gutted.
That's right.
There were thousands of jobs unfilled. Many consulates and even embassies did not have a regular ambassador or consul. They were dealing with deputies because they didn't put the proper people in. They never hired them. This put us in a very, very bad situation in many, many countries. And for that reason, that put us behind the 8 ball. We were also pandering to people that were our enemies, not good for us. I don't have to mention the name of Putin or the guy in North Korea, the little weasel, or any of those people. They were being pandered to. At the same time, the people that were our allies, the Ukraine and others, were not. Now, we're finally, because of Russia's move from Crimea toward Ukraine, we're finally going to be considering, we're only considering, which is ridiculous. I wouldn't consider sending the missile defense systems. I would send the damn things. What are we waiting for? But it's possible because we just didn't have the information, because we didn't have the people in place, and it takes time to get those people. It took 60 to 90 days to get most of the cabinet approved. So how long is it going to take to get thousands of State Department people back on the job that were out of their job? I have a friend who was a undersecretary on the in Africa for the embassy there in one of the departments. He's been with them for a long time. He's an expert on that area, of Uganda and in that general area. And they moved him during Trump's thing. They moved him out and put him in Europe someplace where he had knowledge, but he wasn't an expert. And where he was the expert, they put in some crony from Trump. That accomplished absolutely nothing. And now he's been moved back to the State Department here, and he's in Washington in the State Department under that desk, under the African desk. So this is what we have to overcome. And if you expect that to happen in the first 100 days, my God, what do you going to expect for 4 years? It's going to happen. And I'll also say about product. The reason that we're buying all this product from overseas is greed. It's the greed of the manufacturing people here who decided, in the furniture industry, I can go very close on that, they decided they couldn't manufacture reasonably merchandise here, case goods, bedroom sets and all that. So they went to China, they went to the Pacific Rim, they brought the designs, they brought all the other stuff over there. I know the people personally, the Bassett's and all the others. They brought it there and they had them make it there. The only thing they couldn't produce overseas was the finishes. They didn't have the finishing techniques to finish the furniture with the right, proper lacquers and all that. So what did they do? They took Reliance, the Reliance company, who's the biggest manufacturer of lacquers in the world, in the United States. They sent them over there to show them how to do it. Ha ha! So you can't blame, and I'm not saying the government did that. I'm talking about the manufacturers here, the people that had greed. They became the distributors for their own product being brought in by container from China. Dell is doing the same thing. All these other companies, they're having it made overseas because they can't assemble it here and produce it here for the kind of pricing that they got over there. So it was greed. It's not government greed, it's greed of our businesses, and it goes on in all industries.
Private industry.
In the auto industry in a big way.
Yep.
So
yep. The same thing with
I
my
agree
company.
with what you're saying, but I'm trying to give you some background.
The same, Joel, the same thing. My company, TBC,
Tires,
and tires.
It
gets the tires from China way cheaper than they can be manufactured here in the United States. So you get the cost of goods down because, then you can sell it for a bigger markup. So that's what it's all about. More money in my pocket. How much money can I make? Rabbi, didn't you say something about that one guy, or maybe it was an email I got, that one person in the United States who makes so much money? What is he going to do with all that money? What possibly could he do with all the billions and billions and trillions and, one person making all that money? So
it's not necessary. Let me just weigh in on this a little bit. I do agree with what Emily's saying about a global economy. We have to remember that in China, like in most countries, they have universal health care. So therefore, the businesses don't have to pay their workers for any health insurance or any health expenses at all. It's paid for. Therefore, the cost of the product is going to be less. Plus, in China, they do things that are despicable towards the environment. And here we have laws and regulations that require the companies to clean up and to not. In China, you can just dump stuff wherever you want, and the workers can get some kind of toxic disease. There's no protections. And so, yeah, it's cheaper that way. And I think we have to convince the American people that, do we only want to just look at the price and not care about people being exploited or economy being destroyed? I mean, and also we need to have universal health care because it's fair to people and it also helps the costs go down. As far as Biden is concerned, I was greatly relieved to see Biden. I like someone who's more of an activist, someone who's going to be a fighter, kind of like what Joel was describing, someone who's going to go in and fight hard and make something happen. And so he was a little passive for me, but I have to say that he's pretty darn tough. He's set goals for the coronavirus, and he's a doer. This guy is not just sitting back, he's doing stuff. So I'm very pleasantly surprised to see what he's doing, especially with the coronavirus and especially on climate change. I can't tell you how relieved I am to have somebody who's actually helping to deal with that problem. The thing is, though, we have to do a heck of a lot. I have people that I'm very, very close to. I can't tell you who they are because they're not at liberty to speak, but they both deal with immigration. They both are on the front lines of immigration and seeing people when they come in and determining who's in, who's out. And they told me, they can't speak publicly about it because you're not allowed to. There's rules against that, but they told me the situation is disastrous. The two of them both really like Biden. They think wonderful things about him, but from the trenches, they're saying the immigration situation is horrendous. They both said that under Trump, it was horrendous and very, very cruel. And there were a lot of things that went on that we don't even know about. Really grisly things of people just being tossed back to their deaths, people that the government knew were going to die and they were just all sent back and they died. They know that these people were just sent back and died. They also told me that there are villages where you're told that you have to join this gang. And if you don't, they kill you. And so you have people who come in and they're gang members. And these people were telling me they admitted people that they knew were gang members because if they didn't join, they'd die. And these were people who were fleeing for their lives. And it's not quite as simple as we think. Oh, he's a gang member, don't let him in. They told me that the situation in these countries is so horrific that people are just fleeing here for their lives. And if they go back, they die. And they said that, I questioned them repeatedly because I like Biden. And basically, Biden doesn't have a good answer either, but he is more humane. Being more humane is a double-edged sword because it seems to encourage more people to come in. On the other hand, if people aren't allowed in, they're going to die. So to me, the solution is internationally, the countries of this region and of the world have to work together to try to take out these horrible dictators and to try to fix these countries. And also all the other countries have to take in some people if they're fleeing for their lives. But the situation now is not good. And I do fault the Biden administration for not being candid and telling us, because I know from these folks, the situation is really horrific. and they're not telling us that. That's a problem to me. And the other issue I have is with Israel, the Middle East, and standing up to Islam. I don't see Biden. Biden hasn't done anything really bad yet, so I'm worried. He's getting influence from people that I'm concerned about, and I don't know which way he's going to go. I do believe he has a lot of Jewish people around him, and I do believe that these Jewish people are not going to let anything really bad happen to Israel, and I do believe that he's going to do the right thing. But I'm watching. I'm concerned, and if it's not the right thing, you'll hear from me, because I spoke out about Obama. I didn't care for a lot of things he did, and you'll hear from me. So basically, I'm extremely relieved. I think he's doing really well, and especially compared to what we had
Rabbi,
before.
I just want to say
okay,
one thing
Rabbi,
about you said with China, with the manufacturing. One
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
reasons that they're able
Yeah.
to manufacture India and China is because they are not held to specific guidelines to do what is right for the economy and to do what is right for the earth. They toss things aside.
Absolutely.
That's why they are doing things so cheaply. And that is why we
No,
can't
absolutely.
compete with them, because we are held to guidelines when we do our manufacturing, when we do our production. We are held to those guidelines, and those guidelines cost money. The fact that China and India and these other countries are not held to those guidelines is the very reason why they are able to do what they do as cheaply as they do. And as far as paying people, their living conditions in most cases are horrendous. They are living in shacks. They are living in paper shacks. They're living in cardboard shacks. They're living in mud huts. They are not living a good life. They are very, very restricted. So the quote unquote government is controlling them 100%. They can't speak out. They can't do what we can do here. Okay, so there are reasons why, it costs us more money. We have our freedoms, we have our guidelines, and I think we do respect a lot of the guidelines as far as not only manufacturing, but our education system, okay? They are, in China, they have to attend a certain school for a certain period of times, and they're taught certain things that the government dictates, and that's all that they know. So when they come out of school, they're a worker, they're like robots. They can't, many of them cannot think for themselves. Many of them,
Right.
okay? So we are a different society.
I agree with you 100%. And I think we shouldn't, I think we should have laws that we shouldn't allow products in if they don't meet up to our standards.
Well, I'm agreeing. This is one thing that we agree on, but this is where I am saying that our elected officials have got to take a firmer stand, and we're allowing these businesses to run the government as opposed to our government stepping in and enforcing guidelines that are already on the books. I don't know if anybody is aware of what happened several years ago in California with the Bay Bridge. Look it up. We gave a steel contract to China to manufacture this fabulous bridge. We literally undermined our own steel industry. They gave back the product to build the bridge, and they saw micro cracks in it. It was an inferior product. So instead of taking the contracts away from them, what did we do? We gave the Chinese government billions, not millions, billions of dollars to retool their factories instead of giving it to our steel industry to manufacture that product the first time correctly. And that is just an example of what I'm saying. That's why we've got to get our act together. And that was a political move. And that literally single-handedly destroyed our steel industry. Okay.
I agree with you 100%, Valerie. I do, and I think environmentally, we should not buy products from people who are destroying the planet to make their products and doing it cheaper than we do because we follow the rules. It's just wrong, and that requires international cooperation.
Same side of the coin, okay?
Right.
This is where, as you say, we have to hold our elected officials' feet to the fire. I don't care if it's 100 days. I don't care if it's 200 days. I don't care if it's 10,000 years. If you're going to do the right thing, then you do the right thing. And so far, we unfortunately, on both sides of the aisles, have a track record of not doing the right thing. And the elected, the constituency, we have to pay attention to who we elect. We have to pay attention to who we vote. And I've said this before, it starts at the local level. You've got to pay attention to the local level. Yeah. I'm watching these local elections and hardly anybody shows up. And these are the very people that are climbing the ladder and not doing what needs to be done. So we, the people, have to take a long look in the mirror and see what the heck we're doing and who the heck we're electing.
Yeah, I think we should boycott. I think we should boycott goods from China.
No. You know, you go to China and you see HP computers going down the street in the back of a rickshaw. Um, it, it's again, it's a global society, and some of the things that they do very well. People have been wearing masks in China for years.
That's
Not
because their
because
air
of
is so polluted for years.
No,
Emily, their air is
no,
so
no, no.
polluted, they've had no choice.
well, a lot of it
And
was
India
because the
too.
dust. Wait, a lot of it was because the dust storms that blow in from
Oh,
the
stop. Oh,
desert.
stop. They have been wearing masks for years in China because the air pollution is so bad, and in India. And it has nothing to do with coronavirus. It has to do
No,
with
it has nothing to do with
environment.
coronavirus. It began as the dust storms were blowing in from the Gobi Desert, and then the smog that took over. Yes, you're absolutely right. However, as Joel or somebody said, HP computers may be assembled there and bought here, and as Sharon said, it increases the wealth of this country. So we have to stop and think, are we going to cut back our standard of living to make it a global society? Are we willing to do that? In China, everybody hangs their clothes out. Are we willing to give up clothes dryers? I'm not, but you know, just things that you have to consider. We are not willing to drop our standard of living to improve things. And
No, we're not. But we can stabilize the playing field by holding all these other countries to the same restrictions, the same requirements that we are being held to. Okay,
Perhaps.
that's all I'm saying. If you're talking about a global economy,
Yep.
then it has to be global requirements to meet the rules and regulations of manufacturing and your society. Then we all have to be on the same playing field, but we're not. And
But it
that-
would
that
mean
is-
we would have to drop our standards a little.
No.
Yeah. We would have to
No.
sacrifice in order to.
Would that be the United Nations? Would the United Nations be able to do that?
Well, let me just suggest something. Let me just, what Valerie is actually advocating for, which is something that I agree with, is a global form of government. That what she's saying is that there should be international law preventing certain countries from being able to have standards that are under the others to give them an unfair advantage.
Substandard, not standards.
That's really part of the,
substandards.
right,
Yeah.
that's really part of the Paris Accords. The climate change accords would prevent a country from destroying the planet and getting an unfair advantage and then selling the products to everybody. And I think that would be a good thing. As far as China treating its people horribly, that's true. They do, and that should be condemned. But I don't want to see China's standard of living elevated to ours, because we use up so much carbon and contribute to climate change more per person than any country in the world, because we just use so much. Our carbon footprint is huge. If 1 billion people in China had the same carbon footprint as the average American, the climate change problem would be absolutely horrific. So I'm happy to see other countries not consume to the degree we do. And I think we should be consuming less, not trying to get them to consume more. Rabbi Kahn, let's have you, maybe you can close us out on this and give us some of your thoughts. And then I just want to mention something about an article I wrote in the Jewish Journal, and then we'll call it a day.
Everything I was going to say really about Biden, both in terms of the positives during the first 100 days and also some of the concerns, has been said. And you know, I'm glad we had a chance to talk about these things. I think it's important. There's never been a president who only made right decisions and only did the right thing. So we're going to have a balance. And Biden is also has a lot of political forces that are going to probably push him in some directions that we're not going to love. But overall, there's a lot of great things to celebrate. That's it for me. Final comment for me.
All right. Just want to let you know, online right now is my Jewish Journal article for this week. And last week I wrote an article and I got quite a few responses from conservatives who loved my article. And that's because I had negative comments to say about Black Lives Matter and MSNBC. So now all of a sudden they think I'm okay. So now I know what I need to do. I just call it like I see it. But this week, I wrote something that, Rabbi Kahn, I think you would definitely find of interest. I talked about the prophet Amos, who took on the kings of Israel and was chastising them, and they didn't listen, and then Israel was destroyed. And I mentioned that what happened to the prophetic tradition of the Jewish people of calling out leaders, as Valerie is suggesting, of being a voice in the wilderness and speaking out. And where has that gone? It's like you try to do that and people say, hey, don't be too political, or hey, just talk to me about prayers and stuff. The Jewish people, our proudest moment is when you had prophets who were willing to take on the kings of Israel and say, you're acting immorally, help the poor, feed the hungry, make peace with these nations. These prophets had guts and courage, and they called people out. And it should not just be prophets. Every single Jewish person has a heritage of speaking out and taking on the powers that be. And the Jews of both sides, the Orthodox and the Reform, I don't see either side doing that today. And in my article, I'm saying that I think all Jews should do that. And I'd be interested, Rabbi Kahn, after you, maybe you take a look and share your opinion of that, about trying to restore the prophetic message, because I think the world needs Jews to act like Jews. I do appreciate Valerie speaking out and saying, this is wrong, this is what we should be doing. That's the strength of the Jewish people, the conscience of mankind. And I think we might be losing that. And this is a critical time in history. I think it should be restored. So maybe take a look and let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining in the discussion. It's a lot of fun. Thank you, Sharon, for orchestrating, and thank you everybody for participating.